I always like to simplify my role and say that I wake up in the morning and I argue with people about music. Is effectively, if I had to just say it in one line, that's what it would be. We always had like food in the fridge, and we were always like safe and loved by my mum. But the area that we grew up in was quite a troublesome area. Do you know what I mean? I'm a child of immigrants, do you know what I mean? So I've always prided myself on going into very corporate and British institutions and making change from within. But sometimes it feels like if you are from a particular background, you are seen as only being able to excel in that background. So fast forward to me being now a leader of people and being responsible for sort of hiring and mentoring sort of new generations of talent. I always say to talent, be wider than what you are. Being able to be a social chameleon and being able to what the kids call code switching now is a very, very potent and powerful tool.
Thank you for joining us today for this new episode of Leaders of Diversity. The entire Diversity Seminar Initiative is a completely non-profit, no monetization initiative. The only goal we have is to inspire and guide young, diverse professionals. For 35 years, I've been an executive in the corporate world. I've traveled extensively throughout Europe, so I've seen firsthand the progress of diversity, and my goal is really that we discuss diversity progress and what are the best practices, and that we meet amazing leaders shaping diversity across Europe. So today, I'm in an industry I don't know well about, which is the music industry, and we're going to have an amazing conversation with one of its diverse VP.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Austin. Thank you for having me. It's amazing to have you.
No worries, man. Have you ever been into a music studio before?
Very first time. And that's why, by the way, I would like to ask you a question, because I just don't know about your industry. Of course, I love music like everyone, I listen so much music, but I'd love to ask you, what's the activity of a record company?
Mm-hmm. So a record company is primarily there to act as a distributor of music. So if you are a musician, you can make music, but how do you get it out to the world for the world to hear? That's when you need a company like Warner Music UK, Warner Music Group, Atlantic Records to take that amazing music and push it out for the world to hear. And that's pushing it out physically in stores, if you think about CDs and vinyls and, back in the day, cassette tapes, whether that be on digital platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, YouTube, SoundCloud, etc., or in new and innovative ways, sort of Web 3.0, NFTs, various other digital and sort of new AI-generated ways in which music is sort of put out to the masses. So for us as Atlantic Records, what we do as a record label is we invest in talent, we identify talent, we look to partner with that talent, help them make world-class music, help them make world-class decisions around how they market their music to fans, and then, like I said, help put that music in pipelines to be distributed globally.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. So now I know a bit about
exactly. I'll write it down so you can sort of reel it off at the next dinner party.
That would be awesome. And what's your role?
So my role is, I always like to simplify my role and say that I wake up in the morning and I argue with people about music. Is effectively, if I had to just say it in one line, that's what it would be. But in a more detailed way, on a slightly more serious note, it's my job to lead and inspire the team that do all of those tasks that I just said that the record industry do. So I head up a team that are responsible for the identification of the best in black music sounds. I head up another team that are responsible for the marketing of those artists and the music that they make. So it's my job to lead and inspire the team, basically. And that can mean sort of unblocking, the corporate pipes that exist and the blockages that are within them. That is leading discussions around creative ideas. That is some of the boring stuff around budgets and the admin, around putting records out. It's effectively what I do day to day, but every single day is different. Some days it's mainly more about listening to music. Other days it's around plotting and planning around how we're going to execute a strategy to get that music out to the general public. And then other times, it's some of the more fun stuff, like going to concerts and gigs and getting to spend some time with these world-class artists that we work with. So that's my day-to-day in terms of Atlantic Records.
That's amazing. Fantastic. And who are the artists you have under your label?
So
some of them.
Yeah, Atlantic Records as a whole has, some of the best artists in the world. So we have everybody from Ed Sheeran to Lizzo, 21 Pilots, Cardi B, KSI, Anne Marie. So some of these names are some of the most, globally recognized names, in music and entertainment and culture in general. And I'm proud to work with, vast majority of these names, people like Burna Boy as well. And then we have an amazing array of developing artists as well. So we have artists that some of the viewers of this podcast may not have heard of right now in 2025, but by this time next year they will have heard of. So artists like Tabes, for example, who's a Nigerian Afrobeats artist that we've been developing for the last year, and we think has got the potential to be the next star that comes out of Africa. Awesome. So there's some of the names that we, Atlantic Records, look after.
Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate that. So maybe we could have a conversation in the studio?
Yeah, sure. Listen, I'll walk you through to one of the studios and you can take a look.
Thank you. Let's go. So Austin, really, it's so great to have this time and conversation with you. I appreciate that. So could you share a bit about your family story, your personal story?
I'm an 80s baby that grew up in the 90s. My mum was an immigrant from Nigeria. She came over with 5 kids in tow. I'm the youngest out of 6, so she was pregnant with me when she came over. And she had me just outside London in Kent. And then when I was about a year old, she moved to South London, and that's where I spent my childhood. So yeah, big up mum, single parent household. And her raising, kind of all of us, which is incredible.
Amazing.
We always had like food in the fridge, and we were always like safe and loved by my mum. But the area that we grew up in was quite a troublesome area, sort of high levels of crime, high levels of social deprivation, high levels of people on benefits and out of work, etc. So it wasn't an easy environment to grow up in, is what I would say. But music always soundtracked the madness. Music always soundtracked the household. So some of the sort of funny and crazy things that happened when I was younger, or that I witnessed that happened when I was younger, I always remember there being music in the background, whether that be being super young, like a babe or a toddler, just out of nappies, and hearing Michael Jackson and Madonna and old school West African high life music, through to my sisters being teenagers when I was in primary school, like elementary school, and hearing the sounds of UK drum and bass and UK jungle music and ragga music and stuff like that, through to me becoming a teenager and being able to have my own musical taste. By the time you're 12, 13 years old, you're starting to develop your own musical taste, and you've got the ability to go out and buy music or consume music, So, I just remember my childhood being this incredible kind of explosion of Black British music sounds, But yeah, like I said, it was growing up in Woolwich, the area that I'm from in South London. It was. I've got really good memories, But at the same time, it definitely helped me become who I am, the person I am today. Taught me some valuable lessons, is what I would say.
And on the topic of lessons, I understand you started your professional life working in the retail, like Sainsbury, if I remember well.
Correct.
And it's very interesting because I heard you in an interview saying that you learned some very important things working at Sainsbury. Could you share a bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny when I think about it, but my first few years working in the workforce was in the retail sector, like most teenagers do. So yeah, my first job was working at Sainsbury's. Then I then worked for a shoe shop called Revel, which was like a popular shoe store back in the like 90s and early noughties in the UK. And then I then went from there to working for House of Fraser, which at the time was a really popular like luxury retail department store. So all three of them were slightly different roles, but ultimately as a customer service assistant or a customer sales assistant. And I learned some mad valuable lessons, man. Just like, first of all, the people that done the basics well seemed to be the people that got the promotions or got like the extra work to do, etc. And also sold the most amount of stuff. So I realized quite quickly, oh, that colleague over there in House of Fraser, for example, which was a like a designer store, so it sold designer clothes. That person is being really polite and kind and overly helpful, and they're selling more bags and more shoes than that person who is being a bit aggressive or a bit, you know, confrontational, and they're not selling anything. So things like that. It taught me soft skills. So things like how to send an email, how to turn up on time, how to clock in and out of work. You know, these things sound like standard things to the average person who's grown up in an area where everybody around them works. But I grew up in an area where not everybody around me worked. You know, luckily inside the household, my mum always had a job and my older sisters always had jobs. But the vast majority of people that I grew up with, it was, like I said, it was kind of benefits and people that were on the outskirts of society. So I wasn't necessarily seeing the best examples of how to conduct yourself every single day in the area that I grew up in. So working at Sainsbury's, it was incredible because for the first time ever, I'm seeing everybody en masse do something positive, if that makes sense. So yeah, man, it was a great experience. Sometimes I wish life was simpler, you know, and I could go back to working at Sainsbury's. But listen, man, but you know, those days were fun days. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like you just clock in, you don't take work home with you. You know, you get your nice little £200 paycheck at the end of the day. You know, but listen, I wouldn't trade where I am now for the world. But working in retail, I often say to the sort of the super young people that I might mentor or speak to, if you get an opportunity from the age of like 16 to 17, 18 to do retail work, take it, is what I would say.
And I love so much what you're saying here and what you're sharing, because I'm a high school dropout and I started working, you know, small jobs. I started working in restaurants, and I feel exactly what you're saying here. I learned so much from that, about the attitude, the connection with others, the teamwork, all of that. So it's, you know, I'm always sharing that with young people, is that, you know, build on what you experience, build on those type of experiences, and then grow from there. So that's amazing what you're sharing. But how did you transition to the music industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I turned, 12, 13, 14 years old. I was in my adolescence around about the time that the internet exploded. So we're talking the early noughties, late 90s. So I think 98, 99, 2000, 2001. So my generation of teenagers were the first generation of teenagers with digital camcorders, with floppy disks and CDs and, you know, computers in the household, etc. And this is where luck plays a massive part in it, because my mum had a job where they gave her a computer to take home. And as you might recall, back in the late 90s, it wasn't that common for every household to have a laptop or certainly a computer in their house. You might have one on the street or one in the neighborhood. So me and my friends were into music, and we were making music like in the high school, in the secondary school, like common room and in the lunch hall, etc. And I realized quite quickly that I wasn't that great at making music. I kind of clocked my weaknesses and my strengths quite quickly. And whilst I had one friend over here who was amazing at rapping, I had this guy over here, my other friend, who was amazing at singing. I had another guy who just looked great. You know, I was like, you know, average voice, average rapper, average looker, you know. So I sort of looked at it and I said, maybe none of these are for me. But I felt like I had a really good skill in that I was good at directing people how to market themselves. Now, I didn't realize that I was doing marketing at the time. I just thought me and my friends were having fun. And because I knew how to use things like Photoshop and Microsoft Paint and stuff like that, I would make like CD covers and flyers and stuff like this. And I realized quite quickly, I can do things that others around me can't. So this must be my skill, because nobody else knows how to use that mini DV camcorder, but I'm able to pick it up and within 5 minutes get to grips with changing the white balance, or bringing up the files and deleting things, like things that seem quite simple and intuitive now to everybody who's a digital native. But again, back in the day, it wasn't that simple to just pick up a camcorder and start filming. So yeah, like I said, I kind of realized that I had a skill that other people around me didn't, and I just doubled down on that. I was like, well, let me just double down on being a really good camera person. Let me double down on being a really good marketing person for my friends that are making music. And then what happened was, this is during the height of Napster and LimeWire and the kind of the CD burning era, the MP3 era. So people in my area started to hear about the fact that I had a computer in my house. So they'll get in contact with me and say, hey, can you help me put together my mixtape? Hey, can you help me Photoshop my face, on this banknote for my CD cover, etc. So without realizing it, I became a little bit of a media mogul within my area. I became a bit of a media conglomerate within my area. But again, this is all me just doing what I love and not realizing it. It's only 20 years past that I can look back and say, that's what was happening. So basically, that was how I kind of unofficially fell into music, was by managing and helping out the community around me. The way in which I formally got into music was, I was just trying to find a way to get into the entertainment industry because I was fascinated with music, movies, television. I remember even as a young kid, I'd be watching a movie, and instead of being engrossed in the scene that I was watching, like Home Alone, E.T., any of those kind of classic movies, I would like picture myself zooming out, and I'd think to myself, where are the camera crew sitting? Where's the boom mic? Like things that like a normal 7-year-old shouldn't be thinking. Like I used to think in that kind of way. So I always knew that I had this kind of unnatural, weird obsession with how media and music is put together. So I basically, when I was old enough to start working, I was working at Sainsbury's, but then when I wasn't working at Sainsbury's or the other retail jobs, I was applying for work experience and internships at media organizations. I basically got lucky, was chosen to be an intern by a television production company called Catalyst Television, run by a guy called Tony, who I'll always, thank him for giving me my first opportunity. I was working there for a period of time. I think it was over the summer when I was about 17, 18 years old. And then I did various other bits of work experience, jobs working for different media companies. And what that allowed me to do was build up quite an impressive looking CV, because it would say production company this, television company that. Now, of course, I was only there for like 3 weeks at a time, but you sort of look at it and it looks quite impressive. So I finally got a big break working for a company called Durrance, who are, they don't really exist anymore in the same way, but they were a media monitoring agency. And a media monitoring agency, for maybe the younger audience, they were an agency that basically monitored the media for celebrities and companies. So if you were, let's say Coca-Cola, and you're putting out a new flavor of Coke, you would hire this company Durrance to monitor the news to make sure that nothing bad was said about you, is effectively how it worked. So I started working for Durrance, and one of the clients that I had on my sort of sheet of clients that I had to read about was the BBC. Now, I remember on my first day going into Durrance and being given this list of clients that I had to do media monitoring for. So you get a list of clients and it says, we're going to put you in front of a computer. An article comes up on this piece of software, and the article will have, somewhere in that article, it will mention one of your clients. Oh, wow. So it will mention the BBC somewhere in that article. Wow. You've got to read the article and you have to decide whether it is a good reference when in that case you sort of press good. A bad reference, you sort of press bad,
Wow.
or like a neutral reference.
Wow.
So I remember on my first day being given this sheet and seeing that the BBC was the first name on the list. And I was 19 at the time, 18 at the time. And I was like, whoa, like they're trusting me with the BBC, man. Like this is incredible. Like I sort of went home and like told my mum about it. And of course, what I didn't realize at the time was that the BBC was the short straw, because the BBC gets mentioned so often in all types of media that they give the stupid young intern the BBC to do. So I sort of looked at it and was like, this is incredible. But very quickly realized I was given the short straw. But again, I always talk about luck with these things, because the lucky part of it is that via just the sheer amount I was reading about the BBC, I became this world-class expert in policies and matters and structural organization matters regarding the BBC.
Amazing.
So it was just incredible, because I was 18, 19 years old. And I'm learning every single day about BBC corporate policy, BBC mergers and acquisitions, BBC scandals, television programs. So when a job finally came up working for the BBC marketing department, and it said, you need to know about how the BBC is structured, you need to know about current affairs.
You already knew about
I was just like, this is just a
Amazing.
Complete no-brainer. I'm going to get this job.
Amazing.
So yeah, went for the interview. They tested my current affairs knowledge. You know, I obviously passed with flying colours, because my job was to just read the news every day. And that was how I got into the BBC. And then when I got into the BBC, everything that I'm telling you in terms of that timeline, the backdrop to that is that one of my best friend, a guy called Joe, was a rapper. He was making music, and I basically was managing him. So all the time while the Durrant stuff is going on, and the Sainsbury stuff and the House of Fraser stuff and all of the work experience, while all of that is happening, in the background, I'm managing my friend, and my friend is becoming more sort of successful in his career. And then that's then opening doors for me to network in the music industry. So by the time I got into the BBC, I was kind of ready to then find my way into the music department of the Beeb, man. So yeah, that's the short story of how I got in.
That's amazing. That's amazing to see how you leveraged those opportunities and grew from there. That's absolutely amazing. So if we reflect back now you have a very big role. A few days ago, it was announced that you were given the OBE, Order of British Empire, which is in the UK a very big thing. So for our audience, which is outside of the UK, from our French audience, for example, it's the equivalent of the Légion d'honneur. Mm-hmm. So it's a very big thing in the UK. How do you feel about that? What does it represent for you?
You know, it's an amazing achievement, man. And it's one that I definitely didn't expect. I've had a 20-year career that if I wanted to, I could have leveraged into personal accolades and awards and be put on lists and stuff like that, because I've always worked in positions where the influence that I've had has been industry changing, or like, you know, sort of it can affect the weather almost of the industry, the jobs that I've had. So the one or two times that I've been recognized has just been a byproduct of my passion, more so than me searching it out. So I genuinely never thought that I'll ever be in a position where I'm receiving a letter from the UK government, you know, saying that I'm gonna be given this honor, or recommended to be given this honor. And it's incredible, man. Like I'm an 80s baby. Do you know what I mean? I'm a child of immigrants. Do you know what I mean? So I've always prided myself on going into very corporate and British institutions and making change from within. And you look at my job history and you say, okay, cool, the BBC, you know, where I was there for almost 10 years, you know, working at Spotify, which at the time in which I joined Spotify was one of the most, and it still is, but at the time, one of the most potent musical companies globally in terms of their UK operation. Then Apple Music, and then now Atlantic Records, you know. Amazing. I've always wanted to enact change from within corporations. So to be given this OBE, it represents a lifetime of work, obviously. It represents recognition from some of the most influential people in the country, and for me, I know that my mum, who's no longer here with us, should be obviously super proud that her boy has come good, because if you read some of my old school reports, if you wrote down on a piece of paper, the first 15, 16 years of my life, and OBE definitely wasn't on the cards. So it's an incredible achievement. What I would say is that from my point of view, I always say to myself, how can I look forward and enact change from within? And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm super proud to get it. I'm super gassed. The family, the kids, everyone's happy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so beautiful. And I'm sure your mum is proud of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also I think it's very interesting in the sense that, of course, it's your hard work, your success that gave you this OBE. But I think it's also interesting to think that a country recognizes someone who has a completely diverse background and who is successful. I think it's the dual way of that is very interesting. So very well done, very well done.
Yeah, thank you, man. Yeah, like I said, I definitely never thought that I'd be sat here today, as a OBE. So, it's incredible. And I at the time when it was announced a few days ago, I did say that I was accepting this award on behalf of the incredible artists that I've worked with over the years, because none of my success would have been possible if it wasn't for the incredible artists that I've worked with, the creatives, the executives that have backed me over the years, and that have helped magnify my ambition as well. So yeah.
Totally. So I'd like to transition, because you said that you work from within. You also try to change things from within. And I don't know your industry very well. And I'm very curious to understand if we start, for example, with gender diversity, what is the status of gender diversity in this industry? Of course, not from the artist perspective, because I see so many women, talented women as singers or all of that. But from really the industry, what's the situation?
So most of the major kind of multinational companies do publish gender and ethnic diversity figures, and Warner Music UK do sort of announce, and we do publish our gender diversity figures. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I would say anecdotally, from the industry that I joined almost 20 years ago to today, there are far more executives in positions of influence in these types of companies. In fact, I've just come from our senior management team meeting at Warner, and just mentally picturing around the room, there were more females that are sort of part of the leadership team, sort of board of directors leadership team, than there were when I joined. So I think companies are definitely making an effort to improve matters. I still don't see enough female executives across the board, across the industry. That's very apparent when you go to like award shows, for example, and you sort of look around the table at award shows, and award shows tend to be the places where most of the executives gather, right? And I probably don't see enough executive females there. So it's something that we have to look at as an industry. If I think about my team and Atlantic Records specifically, I think we've got an amazing mix of genders. And I don't want to say it's 50-50, because I'll need to just actually tally up, but it feels definitely as close to 50-50 as possible. And we have, one of my bosses, Bryony Turner, a female, we've got other people that are in positions of, influence on the floor. So, but there's always more that can be done. So I don't want to sit here and say everything's perfect. But there's always more that can be done.
It has improved dramatically.
But it definitely has improved.
And you have this situation, which is awesome. And there's still a lot to do, certainly, but that's an amazing thing. And also the fact that you mentioned that there are executives, female, which is amazing, because I think it's at all levels. Okay? It is the impact of diversity. It's at all levels, so amazing. And on the ethnicity side, because, and by the way, when we met, I loved so much what you said then, because you said, well, I'm not a singer. And I remember when I was a young man, and I wanted to get into the corporate world, and I was looking for role models, and people were telling me, what's the issue? You can look at this artist or this sportsman. And I was so much not interested about those role models. Okay, so I love what you said about the the role modeling and having ethnicity, different ethnicity. So what's the reality of ethnic diversity within your industry?
I think ethnic diversity generally, again, has got better. I would say that there's less progress that's been made at an executive level. Less progress has been made, although progress has been made. And, you know, that's definitely an area that I think the industry, you know, needs to look at. Again, I sort of picture the award ceremonies or the times when the industry all kind of get together, like festivals and stuff. And there's probably not enough team leaders, heads of departments, directors of departments, or heads of verticals, or of course managing director, general managers, presidents, CEOs, that are from ethnic backgrounds, not just black, but Asian and mixed race. I would say that at Warner Music, the Warner Music that I've joined, so, I mean, listen, there were some issues before I joined, but from the Warner Music that I joined, I think they've done a really good job. And I'd big up Max Lusada and Tony Harlow for the work that they've done in bringing me on board and empowering me to make change from within the organization. You've got a guy called Joe Kentish, who is the president of Warner Records UK. You've got someone like Trenton Harrison Lewis, who's a senior vice president over at ADA, which is the massive distribution arm of Warner. And you've got people like Dion, who is in a senior A&R position, and there's more that I could carry on naming. So I think from Warner's point of view, they've done a good job. But of course, you look at it and you say, we're underrepresented in the executive circles across the industry, whereas you look at how much that maybe there's slight overrepresentation in front of the camera, and there's maybe a little bit of an imbalance. The same thing that you see in industries like the sports industry, for example, where there's, you know, a representation on the pitch or on the field, but you look behind the curtain and there's a slight underrepresentation within certain companies. So yeah, it would be unfair for me to call out particular companies, but I definitely think there's more that can be done. And the companies that sort of look in the mirror, if they see this and sort of, you know, count those numbers, how can you improve it?
And it's work in progress. And I think we all want that to go faster. And probably things will evolve over time, which is really great. And so you touched on something that I'm very interested about. You said that you are personally making change, and that's something I heard, by the way. I heard that every time you took a role, you had a direct impact on the diversity of your team. How do you achieve that? What are you focusing on?
So, when I was coming up, I had some really supportive bosses and some really supportive managers. But sometimes it feels like if you are from a particular background, you are seen as only being able to excel in that background. So for example, I came up in a black music industry, and it always felt unfair to me that people were given opportunities outside of their remit if they didn't come from a black music background. So if someone came from a pop or rock or dance music background or a classical music background, they were given the opportunity to have a wide opinion across all musical genres, including black music. But me coming from a black music background, it was, and this is a lot of subtlety and unsaid stuff. This isn't stuff that someone sat me down and said to my face, but it felt, the overall feeling I got was that when it came to black music, we fully trust you, but hey, dance music, pop music, you don't know about that stuff.
Interesting.
That was the feeling that I got when I was in my early 20s and I was trying to do more than just black music. So I was like, I'm gonna show these people that I can do way more than just black music in terms of me being able to identify talent, me being able to support talent, and when I choose to, be able to speak fluently in whatever language that particular genre was dealing with at the time. So fast forward to me being now a leader of people and being responsible for sort of hiring and mentoring sort of new generations of talent. I always say to talent, be wider than what you are, you know. And I just try to put a diverse lens on the people that I hire, you know. So the best person for the job gets the job. You know, I operate a meritocracy. But if you have a situation where you have somebody who comes from a more diverse background, and that can be diverse from a socioeconomic point of view,
Totally.
that can be obviously from a gender point of view, a sexuality point of view, and then of course an ethnic point of view, and you have two people that are neck and neck, you know, they've scored 95 points, you know, they're both neck and neck, but you have someone who can, if I employ that person, it will begin to slightly redress the balance. Without breaking any kind of like, you know, sort of HR and any sort of like legal issues, I'll always go for that person.
And it's the balance. It's
Exactly.
the overall balance that counts,
absolutely.
Right?
You know,
That's
unashamedly, I will make sure that I always go for the diverse talent. And like I said, sometimes, you know, people forget that you can be a white guy from or a white woman from a council estate that grew up poor, that grew up in an abusive household, that dropped out of school. Both your parents are estranged, and then you can then have someone who looks like they're black and they are black, skin tone, but they've actually had a much nicer life experience than that person. So, like I said, it's not just color. We try to redress the balance across the board, you know, is what I would say.
But that's so important what you're saying, because also the social origin, the personal story, the personal background is so important, and creating this openness and ability to promote and recognize talents, whatever their situation, that's absolutely amazing. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing, really great. So you just mentioned something, so we are nearly at the end of this podcast, and if you had a young, diverse professional who wants to work in this industry or whatever, what will be the 2 or 3 advice you will give to this young person?
Mm-hmm. I would say, going back to my very first answer, do the basics well. There are people that I worked with in previous jobs that were by no means spectacular, but they came in on time every day. They, you know, delivered a good standard of work every single day. And those people are now running companies, you know. So don't underestimate the compound effect of turning up every day on time, saying your please and thank yous, building relationships, just those key basic things that any book that talks about self-development or in a workplace is going to tell you. The reason why people write books about this stuff is because it works, you know. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is be a risk taker. Before you have kids, before you start a family, before you have a mortgage to pay, you can take risks that I can't right now. So while you're in your teens and your 20s, there is no consequence to moving around, trying new things, applying for jobs that, you know, maybe is a little bit out of your comfort zone. There's no issue with doing that, or there's less consequence to doing that. So I would say take risks. The reason why I'm sat here today in this position that I'm in is that I took risks and I said yes or went for things when others hesitated, and inertia kills. That's the second thing I'd say. And then the third thing I'd say is never burn a bridge. There are plenty of times where I could have burnt a bridge with somebody or vice versa. And then you fast forward 5 years and it's like, oh, whoa, you've just been given this big job working for this company that could actually help me out. And now we have to work alongside each other, you know? So I've seen people over the years burn bridges, maybe write disparagingly about them on social media, you know, that type of stuff. And I'm like, today's intern is tomorrow's boss, you know? Everybody starts from somewhere. Very few people go from being kind of, you know, intern straight to CEO. There's a journey. So along that journey, that classic saying of the people that you meet on your way up, you're going to see on your way down is very, very true. So I always say to the young people, try and never to burn a bridge, try and find different ways to work out conflict resolution. But yeah, I mean, if you have to burn a bridge, then burn it totally. You know, that's what I'd say.
Amazing piece of advice, really amazing. And I'd like to ask you a last, more personal question. So when we discussed, you mentioned, and I see that, by the way, that you wanted to stay close to who you are and genuine. And so in the way you dress, in the way you speak, in the way you interact with people, which really was very powerful when you said that, because I thought of my own career and I work in the corporate world. And in fact, I always, adopted the codes of the environment. So I was, I had my suit and all of that. And so how do you manage to stay close to who you are and genuine?
Being able to be a social chameleon and being able to, what the kids call code switching now, is a very, very potent and powerful tool to self-development within any corporate workplace. So you have to be able to have a couple of different facets. You have to be able to put on a suit, you have to be able to wear whatever you want, and then somewhere in between. And what I say to the young kids that I chat to is, you do not speak to your mum or your dad or your parents the same way you speak to your friends. So everybody code switches already, because you don't speak to your older family members the way that you speak to your friends, right? You're going to tone down maybe the swearing, you're not going to make certain jokes, etc. So I think everybody code switches. Those that tend to get on well in corporate environments are ones that can code switch maybe between 4 or 5 different characters. But the core person is still them, but you might tweak it for your bosses, you might tone it down for the young people, etc. So I definitely think that I want to just call that out before I say the next thing, which is, I've always tried to be unapologetically me. And I don't think I've ever said this before, but there was one occasion where I basically got promoted at the BBC. And I said to my partner at the time, I said, I've got this new job, and, I now need to show that I'm like, a leader. And all the other leaders in the BBC at the time were wearing jeans with like brogue shoes and shirts. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. Even though I'm a tracksuit guy or a combats and sneaker trainer kind of guy, I'm going to go in on day one and I'm going to dress like the bosses to be like the bosses. Do you know what I mean? Fake it till you make it. And I'll never forget walking in on that sort of first day that I got promoted, and I was wearing, jeans with dress shoes and a shirt. And it was the most ridiculous that I've ever looked in my life. And to this day, friends that saw that outfit still talk about it. So I just remember being sat there, and even my colleagues, I could sort of see them like looking at me, because everyone knows it's Austin. I'm a tracksuit guy, I'm a hoodie guy, and all of a sudden I'm trying to wear a button-up shirt to the top. I've got these ridiculous jeans on with shoes, no socks or whatever. So it was like, so from that day on, literally, I went in on the Monday wearing that ridiculous outfit, and on the Tuesday I said, never again, But you dress accordingly to the norms of the company you work with. So if Atlantic Records had a smart dress policy, I'd be sat here today in chinos and a shirt, you know what I'm saying? And whatever, brogues. But they don't. It's a more casual policy. Great. I'll dress more how I would dress on the weekends and on evenings, etc. So for any young person that's watching this, try and work out a happy medium, Even the most stiffest of companies now, you see the CEOs in more casual attire than you would do 15, 20 years ago. Totally. So I saw even my friend who works in banking can now go in like, a t-shirt and some trousers, whereas it was always a full suit back in the day. Shout out to Chris. So that's what I would say, man. Just try and be yourself, but don't be fooled. Don't always express yourself. But if there is a cultural norm in how a company dresses and there is a dress policy, then adapt, and then add your little rebellious spin on it if you need to. But if the dress policy is that you need to wear a suit, hey, listen, if you want to wear a pink dress, that's absolutely fine. If you want to wear, a green t-shirt, that's absolutely fine. And that's your way to express yourself. But in my opinion, if there's a dress policy, then always, where possible, try and adhere to that.
Thank you for sharing this wonderful story and this hilarious story of the BBC. That was amazing.
Yeah, man. Not one of my finer days.
But great souvenir. Austin, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. I really hope that everyone, our audience, will enjoy that and learn so much from your own background and what you achieved. So it was a pleasure discussing with you today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.